Think about the last time you heard someone pitch a startup.
Oh, yeah. The classic image. Couple of founders in a garage somewhere.
Right. They have a laptop, maybe a whiteboard, and they're just obsessed with the whole lean methodology.
Yeah. Building that minimal viable product.
Exactly. You push an app out, you test it, you pivot. I mean, it's small, it's fast, and most importantly, it's cheap.
Which, has been the absolute gospel of Silicon Valley for decades now.
It really has. You just build the software and assume that the internet, the power grid, and all the hardware are just out there, magically waiting for you to use them.
It's an incredibly comforting mythology, really, because it lowers the stakes so much.
Oh, totally.
Software kind of trained an entire generation of entrepreneurs to believe that friction is a bug. Like, if you can't iterate your product in 2 weeks, you're doing it wrong.
But what we are unpacking in our deep dive today, it's a strategy that looks at that entire lean playbook and just throws it directly into an incinerator.
It really does. They're essentially saying, we can't just build the app. We have to physically build the mountain first.
And they mean that almost literally. So, welcome to a uniquely ambitious deep dive. Our mission today is to completely deconstruct this 10-year business roadmap that I can only describe as audacious.
Audacious is definitely the right word for it.
Right. We are stepping into a strategic framework dated Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. And the premise here is a meticulously engineered plan to take the raw geographic and natural resources of Nepal.
Which are massive, by the way.
Massive. To take those resources and transform them into a $1 trillion AI infrastructure superpower.
Yeah.
The founders actually claim this project will usher in what they call a prophesied age of abundance.
Well, it's vital to ground that phrase right away, though.
Because it sounds a bit out there.
Exactly. When you hear phrases like age of abundance or, prophesied, your brain immediately goes to utopian science fiction.
Right. You expect some guy doing a TED Talk with a lot of hand-waving.
Yeah, but the reality of this strategy is that it's a deeply serious, hyper-aggressive financial and industrial framework.
So definitely not a thought experiment.
Not at all. It's this ruthless calculation of global supply chains, energy physics, and geopolitical leverage.
All designed to take an entity from a $1 billion valuation to a $1 trillion valuation over just a single decade.
Which is exactly why we're digging into it today.
When I first reviewed this plan for Himalayan Compute, which is the name of the project, by the way, it felt like the most aggressive pitch I'd ever seen.
I mean, they describe their core identity as a hybrid of SpaceX, Amazon Web Services, and a national utility company.
Which is a wild combination. So I want to ask you, the listener, have you ever looked at a business model and thought, this is either the ravings of an absolute lunatic or it is a paradigm shift that is going to alter the global economy?
It's a very fine line.
It is. That's the razor's edge we're walking today. We're going to hand you the analytical tools and the underlying physics of this plan so you can make that call for yourself.
And to even begin to understand why their end game demands a $1 trillion scale, you really have to look at their deliberate rejection of modern tech culture.
Right, that blunt, upfront framing.
Yeah, they boast about doing everything the wrong way. They explicitly state that if they ever pitched this as a lean, agile startup, institutional investors would just laugh them out of the room.
They are embracing absolute crushing capital intensity.
Exactly.
And I really want to linger on that because in the tech world, capital intensity needing billions of dollars just to start is usually a death sentence for a pitch.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like someone walking into a VC firm pitching a new social media app, but saying, oh, by the way, before we write a single line of code, we need to lay our own fiber optic cables across the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
Which sounds completely insane.
Right. Why on earth would you intentionally embrace a massive upfront cost like that?
Well, because they aren't actually building a tech company in the traditional sense.
Okay, what are they building then?
Their strategy redefines the business entirely. They aren't a data center startup. They are positioning themselves as, and this is a quote, national scale energy to intelligence industrial platform.
Energy to intelligence industrial platform.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. When you are building physical infrastructure at that scale, needing massive capital isn't a weakness. It's actually the very foundation of your competitive moat.
The document calls it an irreversible execution moat.
Yes.
Right. Let's unpack that for a second.
Yeah.
I'm picturing something like the Hoover Dam or the Transcontinental Railroad.
That's the exact parallel you should be drawing.
Because you can't really disrupt the railroad by building a better app.
Precisely. The barrier to entry is engineered to be astronomically high.
Yeah.
The sheer physical violence of moving earth, pouring concrete, rerouting rivers, it means that once you actually get the machinery moving, no competitor can easily replicate your footprint.
Because you already have the government permits, the land rights, the high-voltage power lines. Right. I mean, if a lean startup builds a great photo-sharing app, a tech giant can just copy the code and deploy a clone in 3 weeks.
Sure, we've seen that happen a million times.
But Google cannot just snap its fingers and instantly manifest a hydroelectric dam in the Himalayas.
They literally can't.
No. By choosing the hardest, most expensive physical path, Himalayan Compute ensures that once they establish momentum, they are virtually untouchable.
But that massive upfront cost leads us to the shopping list. Because you have this mountain of capital, but what is it actually buying?
It's not just pallets of servers, that's for sure.
Right. The founders have identified 5 specific interconnected bottlenecks that they basically have to solve simultaneously.
Yeah, it's a cascading ecosystem of heavy industry. And the interdependency is the genius of it. You can't solve one and ignore the others.
Okay, let's break down these 5 core bottleneck assets for the listener.
So the first is hydropower capacity.
Moving water.
Right. Moving water is cheap over a 50-year horizon. But the upfront engineering, the tunneling, the turbines, the sheer concrete, it requires staggering capital.
And generating the power means nothing if you can't move it. Which brings us to the second bottleneck, transmission and substations.
Exactly. You can't just plug a massive AI factory into a residential wall outlet.
Right. You need grid-grade, heavy-duty power delivery. You need to pull that electricity out of a remote river gorge and safely deliver it to a massive computing campus without, losing it all as heat along the way.
Which naturally hits the third bottleneck, roads and logistics.
Ah, right. This is Nepal we're talking about.
Yeah, the terrain is famously vertical and unforgiving.
Yeah.
You're talking about moving transformers that weigh hundreds of tons up winding mountain passes.
You can't just drive a standard Amazon delivery van up a hiking trail.
No, you definitely cannot. Overcoming that geography makes the baseline infrastructure cost vastly higher than, say, building in a flat desert.
Okay, so that's 3. Then you actually have to build the brain of the operation. Bottleneck 4 is the AI data centers.
And we should make a very aggressive distinction here.
Right, because the strategy does. These are not standard cloud storage centers where your old emails sit.
Exactly. These are high-density AI factories. The power density and the thermal management required for massive clusters of GPUs they're on a completely different planet compared to traditional server farms.
Which leads perfectly into the 5th and final piece. And the founders explicitly call this the biggest bottleneck in the world.
GPU supply chain access.
Okay.
The physical chips themselves.
Okay, so looking at this massive web hydropower, transmission, roads, AI factories, and GPUs, I want to push back a little on the idea that they're all equal.
How so?
Well, what is the true linchpin here? Because right now, every tech company on Earth is fighting a bloody war over those GPUs. If they solve one bottleneck, do the rest just fall into place?
The GPU shortage is the constraint that dictates everything else. Global demand for these specific AI chips from manufacturers like TSMC and NVIDIA is so extreme that you can't just order them with a credit card.
You practically have to be a nation-state to get priority.
Exactly. But the founders are betting that the GPU bottleneck isn't fatal to them because of the hydropower.
I see where this is going. The strategy connects the water directly to the silicon.
Yes. Chip manufacturers prioritize credible, massive buyers who actually have the power to turn those chips on.
Right.
The core gamble of Himalayan Compute is this. If you control unprecedented civilization-level amounts of electricity, and we're talking about their target of 40,000 megawatts, the chip manufacturers will be forced to treat you as a sovereign buyer.
For you listening, think about how that completely flips traditional business logic on its head.
It really does.
Normally, you buy a product, say an electric car or server, and then you figure out where to plug it in. The product justifies the power. But here, they are saying that simply hoarding the power guarantees you access to the product.
Exactly. If you hold the keys to the cheapest, most abundant electricity on Earth, the world's most constrained, exclusive supply chain will literally reroute itself to your front door.
That's just a brilliant leverage play.
It is. Global AI computation is constrained by energy just as heavily as it is by silicon right now. You can print more chips eventually, but you cannot print new rivers.
Right.
So if you solve the energy equation at scale, you dictate the terms to the silicon suppliers.
But to command that kind of sovereign respect, you need an incomprehensible amount of power. So let's pivot to the hard math of Nepal's hydro potential.
This is where the strategy shifts from like a clever theory into a set of staggering financial projections.
Yeah, because the scale is almost hard to conceptualize.
The working consensus is that Nepal's economically feasible hydropower potential sits somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 megawatts.
Okay.
And the entire roadmap of Himalayan Compute anchors itself to that upper limit of 50,000 megawatts.
Just to visualize that for you, the listener, 50,000 megawatts or 50 gigawatts is roughly equivalent to the entire peak electricity demand of the United Kingdom.
Wow.
Yeah. Imagine building the entire UK power grid from scratch, completely out of water, in the middle of the Himalayas. That is the scale we are talking about.
And the economics of building in that terrain really reflect that scale.
I can imagine.
Standard global costs for hydropower fluctuate wildly. You're looking at anywhere from $1.5 million to $3.5 million just to construct a single megawatt of capacity.
The 1 megawatt.
Right. And that factors in the brutal realities we talked about. Tunneling through rock, building new access roads, managing resettlement.
So what's their estimate for Nepal?
Given the extreme verticality of Nepal, their model assumes an average cost of $2.5 million per megawatt.
Okay, let's just pause and absorb that multiplication.
Yeah.
50,000 megawatts at $2.5 million each.
It's a big number.
That is a total capital expenditure of $125 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not venture capital. The founders literally call it a nation-building figure in the document.
It is. It's on par with the Apollo space program or, the construction of the U.S. interstate highway system.
It's an unimaginable sum of money for a startup.
It is. But here is where their financial modeling shows immense discipline.
Okay.
They aren't just hoarding all 50,000 megawatts to run their own AI servers. They use a strict 80-10-10 allocation model to create multiple revenue streams and, honestly, to ensure geopolitical stability.
How does that breakdown actually work in practice?
So out of the 50,000 megawatts, 80%, which is 40,000 megawatts, is strictly reserved for their AI compute factories.
The main engine. Got it.
Right. Then they carve out 10% or 5,000 megawatts to feed directly into the Nepal domestic market.
Okay.
And the final 10% is dedicated to exporting raw electricity across the border into India.
So they're effectively operating a massive traditional utility company with that 20%.
Exactly. They are just selling raw electricity.
Let's look at the baseline revenue from that utility side, because I feel like even the scraps of this project are massive.
Oh, they are. If you run those hydro dams continuously, what the industry calls a high-capacity factor, and you sell the power domestically to Nepal at roughly 7 cents a kilowatt hour, you generate over $2.5 billion a year.
Wow.
Add in the exports to India at a slightly lower wholesale rate of, say, 6 cents, and that's another $2.3 billion.
So you have roughly $5 billion a year in highly reliable, predictable baseline revenue just from being a power plant.
It's a fantastic baseline. It services debt, it keeps the lights on. But as the founders put it, that $5 billion is just the floor. The compute is the multiplier.
Which brings up an analogy from this strategy that I absolutely love. They contrast selling raw electricity versus selling AI compute as apples versus applesauce.
A great metaphor.
Right. If you sell raw electricity to India, you are picking an apple off a tree and selling it at a commodity price. It has value, sure, but selling AI compute. That is taking that raw apple, pureeing it, adding cinnamon, packing it into an artisanal glass jar, and selling it at a massive premium as organic applesauce.
The ultimate value add.
Exactly. You are taking cheap electrons and processing them into highly valuable artificial intelligence.
And the math on that value add is what drives the entire trillion-dollar thesis.
Walk me through it.
Selling raw electricity yields thousands of dollars per megawatt. Exporting compute yields millions of dollars per megawatt.
Millions.
Yes. The roadmap models 3 different pricing scenarios for the 40,000 megawatts dedicated to compute, depending on how the global AI market matures over the next decade.
Give me the conservative scenario first, because I always say if the conservative model works, the whole thing works.
So their absolute conservative case assumes they can monetize compute at $10 million per megawatt per year.
Okay.
You multiply that by their 40,000 megawatts, and that yields $400 billion a year in revenue.
Wait, 400 billion as the conservative floor.
Yeah. Yes, that's the floor. Then you look at their base case, which models $20 million per megawatt per year. That pushes annual revenue to $800 billion.
That's just wild.
And if the AI boom continues to accelerate and compute becomes even more scarce, their aggressive case assumes $30 million per megawatt,
Which would be.
an astonishing $1.2 trillion a year in recurring revenue.
Let's just hold those two concepts side by side for a second. Selling the raw electricity export gets them $5 billion a year. Processing that electricity into AI compute gets them between $400 billion and $1.2 trillion.
It's a different universe.
The underlying thesis is undeniable, really. In the 21st century, electricity is pocket change compared to the intelligence that electricity can generate.
And the founders acknowledged the reality of this, of course. Generating compute requires billions in data centers and GPUs. It's vastly more expensive to build than a simple transmission line.
Oh, for sure.
But even when you account for that intense capital expenditure, compute generates 50 to 200 times more revenue per megawatt than raw electricity.
That margin is incredible.
Yeah, even if they face severe delays. Or if the utilization of the servers drops by half, it still functions as a civilization-scale export engine.
But I keep coming back to the price tag.
The $125 billion.
Yes. $125 billion just for the dams, plus billions more for the data centers. You cannot just walk into JP Morgan and ask for a $125 billion loan for a PowerPoint presentation.
Definitely not. Which is why this requires a highly structured, staged funding ladder.
Right, they have it all mapped out.
They do, in 3 very distinct rounds. So the first phase is a $100 million raise at a $1 billion valuation.
Okay.
And they explicitly call this the permission and prototype round.
Okay, I have to throw a flag on the play right here.
Why is that?
$100 million for a prototype. And it automatically gets a $1 billion unicorn valuation. I mean, if you are building software, a $100 million raise implies you already have millions of paying users.
True.
How does a massive infrastructure play justify that kind of seed money when they haven't even poured a single yard of concrete?
It looks absurd until you realize what that $100 million is actually buying. They aren't trying to build a dam with $100 million. You're right, that's impossible.
So what are they doing?
They are buying the right to build. The strategy breaks this raise into micro steps. It's like $100,000 for ideation, $1 million for a core team, $4 million to set up global offices. They release the capital only as credibility compounds.
So what are the actual hard deliverables at the end of that $100 million?
Well, they have to secure something called a one-desk policy with the Nepalese government, which we will dive into shortly.
Okay.
They have to bank the land, and crucially, they have to secure PPAs, or power purchase agreements, for a 50 to 200 megawatt initial cluster.
Let's translate PPA for the listener because it's a massive piece of the infrastructure puzzle.
Go for it.
A PPA is essentially a guaranteed buyer contract. It's an agreement that says, if we generate this power, you promise to buy it at this price for the next 20 years.
Exactly.
And once you have that signed contract, you can take it to a bank, and the bank will give you the massive loans required to actually build the facility because the revenue is essentially legally guaranteed.
Right. So the $100 million de-risks the project. It secures the government alignment, gets the first anchor contract signed, and brings a small pilot cluster online to prove the tech works.
Ah, I see.
Once you have that, you haven't just built a prototype, you have excavated that irreversible execution mode. You have proven you can operate in the Himalayas. And that unlocks round 2.
Which is the regional scale round.
Yes, a $1 billion raise at a $10 billion valuation.
Okay, now the numbers are getting serious.
Very serious. At this point, they transition out of the venture capital ecosystem entirely. They are now raising infrastructure acceleration capital.
Because they're building the real thing.
Exactly. They're deploying multiple gigawatts of power, launching sovereign data zones, and unlocking massive project finance debt.
Which finally paves the way for round 3. A $10 billion raise at a $100 billion valuation.
Right.
The strategy calls this the global inevitability round, where they prepare to take the company public as a utility-scale AI factory.
And this is where we hit their justification for the trillion-dollar endgame.
Yeah, how does a company that pours concrete and lays cable convince the public markets they are worth $1 trillion?
That's a great question, because traditionally, infrastructure companies like water utilities or rail networks, they trade at very boring low multiples.
Right. They are safe, but they don't explode in value like software companies.
Exactly. But the founders reject the idea of using a software multiple. They aren't going to pretend they deserve a 100x multiple on $10 billion in revenue.
So what's their model?
Instead, they apply a standard, realistic infrastructure multiple to an unimaginably large revenue base. They propose a 20x multiple on $50 billion of core operating profit, or what they term annual recurring revenue.
A 20x multiple on 50 billion gets you your trillion.
Yes.
But why does AI infrastructure command that 20x multiple compared to, say, a standard power plant?
Because of the lock-in.
Right.
The demand is shortage-driven. You have contracted, sticky customers.
Sticky meaning they can't leave easily.
Right. If a pharmaceutical giant spends 2 years moving all of its global AI drug discovery models onto your Himalayan Compute cluster, they cannot easily unplug and move to a competitor.
Oh, the switching costs are too high.
Exactly. It's a guaranteed annuity for decades.
I see the financial logic. The math holds up on a spreadsheet.
It really does.
But let's pull back and look at the actual map, because there is a massive geopolitical elephant in the room here.
Oh, yeah. The geography.
Right. You can model the funding, you can sign the contracts, you can build the most beautiful high-tech dams on Earth. But this entire civilization-scale asset is physically located within the borders of a single developing nation sandwiched between China and India.
The sovereign risk is, without a doubt, the single greatest point of failure.
Exactly. I mean, what happens when a new administration takes power in Nepal, looks at this $125 billion golden goose, and says, "Thank you very much, we are nationalizing this today"?
It happens all the time in history.
Right. Or what if they don't seize it outright, but they just suffocate it with endless bureaucratic red tape? How do the founders prevent the host country from just turning against them?
This is where the roadmap transitions from financial engineering into what I would call geopolitical architecture.
Okay, I like that term.
They don't just hire lobbyists. They physically weave the host nation into the corporate cap table.
What does that mean structurally?
They outline a radical ownership structure. 10% of the parent company's equity is granted directly to the government of Nepal.
Wow, okay, this is brilliant. I like to think of this as paying a licensing fee to the country's operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about your smartphone. If a developer wants to sell an app, they have to pay a 30% cut to Apple or Google just for the privilege of running on their hardware.
Right.
Nepal is the hardware. The mountainous geography is the operating system.
Yeah.
If Himalayan Compute doesn't give the operating system its cut, their massive AI software eventually crashes.
That OS analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
And the return on that 10% equity for Himalayan Compute is speed.
Ah, the one desk policy you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. In exchange for the equity, the government establishes that one desk policy.
Mhm.
The company doesn't have to bribe local officials or navigate 20 different environmental ministries.
They deal with a single, streamlined, sovereign entity.
Yes. But the strategy actually goes even further.
Wait, there's more.
Yeah. Another 10% of the equity is placed into an irrevocable foundation, dedicated strictly to direct cash transfers for the poorest 20% of Nepal's population.
So 20% of the company belongs to the nation and its citizens.
Yes.
That isn't charity. That is the ultimate political insurance policy.
It is. Let's quantify that insurance policy because the numbers are just staggering.
Please do.
The founders model a conservative maturity phase. Let's say by year 10, the company isn't hitting $1 trillion, they are just hitting $200 billion a year in revenue.
Okay, very conservative based on earlier numbers.
Right. And let's assume a healthy core operating profit margin, what financiers call EBITDA, of roughly 40%.
That leaves you with $80 billion a year in core profit.
Exactly. Now, let's assume the company distributes a quarter of that profit as dividends to its shareholders. That's a $20 billion annual distribution.
Okay, tracking.
The Poverty Foundation holds 10% of the equity. 10% of $20 billion is $2 billion injected in pure cash every single year directly to the most impoverished citizens of Nepal.
To put that in perspective for you listening, $2 billion a year in direct cash transfers in a developing economy, that completely rewrites the socioeconomic fabric of the nation.
The founders state plainly in the strategy, that alone would be a revolution.
I believe it.
And if revenues scale toward $500 billion, they describe the poverty-ending effect as overwhelming.
This fundamentally mutates the DNA of the corporation. It completely inoculates them against the foreign extractor narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
Historically, whether it was the East India Company or modern oil conglomerates, foreign capital enters a developing nation, extracts the raw resources, and funnels the profits back to London or New York, leaving behind, environmental damage.
Right, the classic extraction model.
But here, the nation is a co-founder. Every citizen living in poverty receives a direct digital dividend from those AI clusters.
Yeah.
Suddenly, protecting the data centers isn't just about corporate profits, it is an existential national priority.
It creates total alignment. And that alignment actually extends to how the physical roads are built, too.
How so?
The strategy relies on a playbook directly lifted from China's Belt and Road industrial expansion.
Mm.
The founders proposed that the Nepalese government issue between $20 and $40 billion in global sovereign bonds to finance the access roads and the logistical pathways.
I have to imagine global markets would be deeply hesitant to buy $40 billion of debt from a developing nation just to build mountain roads.
They would be, normally,
Yeah.
unless those roads directly unlock a trillion-dollar export engine.
Ah, I see.
From a macroeconomic perspective, if Himalayan Compute begins generating even $10 to $20 billion in annual high-margin tech exports, servicing a $40 billion national bond becomes trivial.
Wow.
The infrastructure debt effectively pays for itself by birthing an entirely new, ultra-lucrative compute economy.
Okay, we've covered the capital, the geopolitics, and the massive hydro potential. But there is a purely physical question that we need to answer.
What's that?
Yes, Nepal has massive rivers. But so do other parts of the world. Why subject yourself to the misery of building heavy infrastructure in the freezing vertical extremes of the Himalayas?
Right.
I mean, why not build this in a flat, easily accessible desert region in the Middle East and just use solar power? What is the actual physical advantage of the mountain?
To understand the geographic advantage, we really have to look closely at the thermodynamics of artificial intelligence.
Okay, let's get into the physics.
Let's break down the capital expenditure of an AI data center.
Hmm.
Building the facility costs roughly $8 to $20 million per megawatt, and that doesn't even include the GPUs.
Just the shell.
Right. That cost covers the reinforced concrete, the substations, the high-speed networking, and most importantly, the cooling systems.
Right, because AI chips, specifically GPUs running large language models, they run incredibly hot.
Oh, incredibly hot.
They are essentially specialized space heaters that also happen to do math. If you don't aggressively cool them, they physically melt themselves down in minutes.
Which brings us to the most critical metric in the data center industry, PUE, or power usage effectiveness.
PUE. Let's explain that.
It is a ratio that measures how much total power a facility uses compared to how much power actually reaches the computing hardware.
Got it.
Ideally, you want a PUE of 1.0, meaning every single watt goes directly into the computer.
But that's impossible in the real world, right?
Right. In the real world, massive, active cooling-like industrial air chillers and liquid cooling pumps, they consume huge amounts of energy. In a hot climate, active cooling can eat up 15 to 25% of your total power budget.
So if you build a 100 megawatt data center in a hot desert, up to 25 megawatts of that precious, expensive electricity is doing absolutely zero computing.
Exactly.
It is just spinning fans and pumping refrigerant to fight the ambient heat of the desert.
Exactly. And this is the profound natural cooling advantage of the Himalayas.
Because it's freezing.
Right. By building these AI factories at high freezing altitudes, you practically eliminate the need for heavy, power-hungry active chiller systems.
Oh, wow.
You draw in the naturally freezing ambient air, or you utilize the glacial meltwater for high-efficiency immersion cooling, where the servers are literally submerged in specialized, non-conductive fluids.
That sounds sci-fi, but it's real.
It is very real. You slash water waste, you massively reduce your cooling capital expenditure, and you drive your PUE down to near-perfect efficiency.
That is the ultimate aha moment for me.
Yeah.
It means that 40,000 megawatts of electricity generated in the freezing mountains of Nepal is functionally and financially more valuable than 40,000 megawatts generated in a hot climate.
Precisely.
Because a vastly higher percentage of the Nepalese power goes straight into the silicon to crunch neural networks rather than just warring against the weather. It is a massive structural arbitrage on global computing power.
And that thermal advantage is what guarantees the demand from global megabuyers.
Let's talk about those buyers.
The strategy categorizes these anchor customers into 4 distinct, insatiable tiers.
Okay, let's run through these buyers. Who is lining up to purchase this premium Himalayan Compute?
Tier 1 is the hyperscalers. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle.
The usual suspects.
Right. These giants are looking to diversify their geographic footprint to avoid regulatory bottlenecks in the West.
Makes sense.
Tier 2 is the AI labs, companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta, whose internal demand for training next-generation models is virtually infinite.
Those first two tiers make complete sense. We read about them every day. But the plan expands far beyond traditional Silicon Valley tech, right?
That's where Tier 3 comes in. Sovereign buyers.
Ah,
This is a massive shift in global security.
yeah.
The strategy explicitly targets the Indian government, as well as sovereign compute zones in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the European Union.
Whole governments buying compute.
Yes, these are entire nations that recognize AI as a matter of national security and realize they cannot rely exclusively on American infrastructure. They need independent, massive offshore capacity.
And finally, Tier 4.
Enterprise, mega buyers. These are the industries that require massive simulation and inference capabilities at scale.
Like who?
Pharmaceutical companies using AI to simulate protein folding for drug discovery, global financial institutions running real-time risk analysis across global markets, and telecom giants managing next-generation networks.
Just massive industries.
Right. The roadmap correctly identifies that across these 4 tiers, the global demand for dedicated compute is genuinely bottomless.
You know, when you lay it all out like that, the cold air, the massive rivers, the political alignment, the sovereign buyers, it paints a picture of a virtually flawless physics-based monopoly on Earth.
It's extremely comprehensive.
They are maximizing every drop of water and every icy gust of wind. But here's where the strategy takes a final, almost unbelievable turn.
Oh, yes.
Because their vision for energy to intelligence doesn't actually stop at the Himalayas.
No, it does not. The final phase of the roadmap acknowledges a hard ceiling.
Right.
Nepal has incredible potential, but it is finite. The hydro capacity maxes out at 50,000 megawatts.
So what happens when they run out of water?
Once they tap that final drop of water, the founders are looking up. The ultimate frontier of this roadmap is space-based data centers.
Space data centers. I have to be honest, when I first read this section, I laughed out loud.
A lot of people probably would.
I mean, we are talking about the grueling logistics of moving concrete up a mountain,
Right.
and suddenly we are talking about putting servers in orbit. It sounds like they let a sci-fi novelist write the last chapter of the financial model.
It sounds absurd until you evaluate it purely through the lens of physics and economics, which is exactly how the founders approach it.
Okay, defend it for me.
They don't romanticize space. They actually do a ruthless unit cost comparison between Earth-based hydro and space compute.
And what's the verdict?
They admit that right now, hydro is absolutely unequivocally cheaper. Earth-based water power is the anchor of the decade. But space solves every single bottleneck we've discussed in ways Earth simply cannot.
Walk me through the physics of a space data center. How is it better than a frozen mountain?
Well, first, cooling. In the Himalayas, the air is cold, but you still have an atmosphere. In the vacuum of space, cooling is functionally free. You vent the immense thermal exhaust of the GPUs directly into the void.
Oh, okay.
Second, energy. In space, you have access to uninterrupted, hyperabundant solar energy without atmospheric degradation or night cycles. You never have to worry about a dry season affecting river flows.
Because the sun is just always there.
Exactly. Third, you bypass terrestrial geopolitics entirely, and you achieve unprecedented physical security and global low-latency beaming.
Okay, the thermal and solar dynamics make perfect sense. But there is a catastrophic caveat here.
The launch costs.
Exactly. Rockets are incredibly expensive.
And the roadmap acknowledges this. All of those zero-gravity advantages remain theoretical until the price per kilogram to low Earth orbit collapses.
Right.
But what's crucial is the pragmatic phasing of the strategy. The founders aren't asking for venture capital to shoot servers into the sun tomorrow.
It's not phase 1.
Right. Phase 1 and Phase 2 of this 10-year plan are strictly bound to Earth. The hydro pays the bills and builds the empire.
And space.
Space is explicitly categorized as Phase 3. It's an expansion hedge, ready to be activated only when launch costs plummet and Earthbound geography is entirely exhausted.
That phased approach proves they aren't just daydreaming.
Yeah.
It underscores the true underlying philosophy of Himalayan Compute. The mission was never just about Nepal. Nepal is merely the most mathematically efficient starting point.
Precisely.
The true mission is finding the absolute thermodynamic optimum for converting raw energy into intelligence, wherever that environment happens to be. First, they conquer the mountains, and then they conquer the stars.
It is the ultimate manifestation of infrastructure as destiny. The transition from the ethereal digital cloud to brutal, physical, energy-intensive architecture is the defining shift of our current era.
So let's pull all of these threads together for you listening. We started with a roadmap that violently rejects the lean, software-centric startup model.
Right, burning the lean playbook.
Instead, it demands a $100 million initial phase just to de-risk a project and secure government alignment. That unlocks a staggering $125 billion national infrastructure
The
mobilization.
nation-building phase.
Exactly. They take 50,000 megawatts of raw, freezing water power, use a fraction to power the domestic grid, and transform the lion's share into a trillion-dollar AI compute engine.
Apples to applesauce.
And by embedding the host nation and its most impoverished citizens directly into the equity structure, they propose an end to extreme poverty while guaranteeing their own survival.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of heavy engineering, advanced thermodynamics, and geopolitical architecture.
It really is.
Integrating sovereign debt for logistics, aligning state interests with corporate profit, and leveraging extreme geography to build an untouchable AI export engine. It is a masterclass in grand strategy.
And the reality is, whether or not this specific company, Himalayan Compute, fully realizes this 10-year vision, the underlying mechanics we've explored today are inevitable. Securing sovereign-level compute, converting raw energy into intelligence, and navigating the physical limits of our planet. This is exactly the battlefield where the global economy of the next decade will be decided.
We are leaving the era where software ate the world and entering the era where artificial intelligence consumes the power grid.
Which leaves us with a lingering, deeply provocative thought for you to chew on.
Let's hear it.
This strategy essentially treats a sovereign nation as a corporate co-founder. It merges national policy with boardroom strategy. As the energy demands of artificial intelligence outgrow what traditional corporations can physically build on their own, are we watching the beginning of an era where tech companies and nation-states become entirely indistinguishable?
That is a terrifying and fascinating thought.
Will we soon live in a world where geopolitical borders effectively merge with corporate balance sheets? Let that idea simmer until our next deep dive. Remember what we discovered today. Sometimes, if you want to build the future, you can't just write code in a garage. You have to buy the mountain.